Hello and welcome to Castle and Key Distillery. My name is Abigail. I'm going to be telling you a little bit about the site history and the Castle and Key story. Later on, Jordan is going to teach you about our spirits. Let's get started with some history. The history of this site dates back to 1887 when Colonel E.H. Taylor Jr. built the old Taylor Distillery. Colonel Taylor wanted to build a quality bourbon distillery, but he also wanted to create a first-class destination where he could bring guests out, entertain them, and introduce this tourism and hospitality component that was quite new to the bourbon industry. Colonel Taylor distilled here up until 1920 when Prohibition came into effect. At the age of 90, he decided he was finally ready to retire. He did pass away a few years later in 1923. So a decade after his passing in 1933, national prohibition was repealed and a company named National Distillers acquired the property. So they quickly began to modify and expand in the mid-1930s. They added on to the existing buildings and also constructed several of their own over the next few decades as they continued to grow. At their peak, National was producing up to 1,000 barrels per day at this property, which is pretty impressive even by the industry standards today. However, National shut down production in 1972 when the market was shifting away from whiskey and clear spirits really took over. Aging and bottling did continue into the 80s, but by the late 80s, National was acquired by Jim Beam, now Beam Suntory. The property went up for sale, and not too much happened over the next few decades. The property was very briefly owned by a former National Distillers employee, and then by an architectural salvage company who came here looking for valuable materials and ended up tearing down 2 brick warehouses. But aside from that, the property was mostly abandoned until 2014. In 2014, our founders Will Arvin and Wes Murray purchased the abandoned distillery and got to work on the restoration. We fired up our stills and began producing our spirits in November of 2016. Our first barrels went into the warehouse just 1 month later. In 2018, we hosted our grand opening to the public and began offering tours, tastings, and retail experiences right here on the property. And in 2020, our very first aged spirit, the Restoration Rye Whiskey, was released to the public. We are still very patiently waiting for our bourbon to be ready to enjoy, and there's still lots of work to do in the meantime as the restoration will always be an ongoing process here. Let's go take a look at some of the property, starting with the spring house. Welcome to the spring house. This is one of the original parts of the property, also one of the most important. So Colonel Taylor, inspired by Roman bathhouses, had this built to entertain his guests. He would bring guests out to the site on these private rail cars. They would disembark just next to the spring house and then join the party here. So this is really essential in his hospitality, essential in making this a destination back in the 1800s, early 1900s. But it was also key to Colonel Taylor's production. So the water in this pool is actually from a natural spring. It also has limestone sidewalls. That limestone is helpful in removing impurities such as iron, kind of a natural filter, but it also adds some nicer minerals like calcium and magnesium. So Colonel Taylor was really focused on making quality bourbon here. He believed that the good water source was the key to that good bourbon. He believed in that so much that the pool he had shaped as a keyhole, little nod to that philosophy. So we still use all of the water for our spirits right out of this spring. We do filter it a few times before we use it to cook our grains. All of our spirits, again, distilled right here on site from scratch. This is how we got part of our name. You've seen the castle up front. The spring house here is the key. The iconic limestone castle here was built by Colonel Taylor in about 1887. This has always been the heart of production. The distillery itself is right inside of those doors even today. Now, the castle did need a fair amount of restoration, hadn't been used in about 40 years. Most of the roof was missing, a lot of the equipment just didn't seem functional anymore. Fortunately, we were able to restore a fair amount of it, so our grain bins and scale hoppers we still use today date back to the 1930s, the fermentation tanks to the 1950s. Our distillation equipment, our column stills and doublers, are new to us, made for us by Vendome out of Louisville, Kentucky. But we fired up all of our equipment in 2016 and began distilling our spirits. So the first time in over 40 years that production took place in the castle once again. Let's go take a look inside. Inside the castle, we have both old and new equipment. The front portion of the castle houses our grain bins and scale hoppers. This equipment is original to National Distillers and dates back to 1936. We store our grains in the bin, mill them using a modern rolling mill, then measure out each grain by weight in the scale hoppers. The grains are then sent below into our cookers, where we add water from the spring house. Then that cooked mash is sent over into a fermentation tank. The fermentation tanks you see here were installed in the 1950s. Fortunately, we were able to restore them for use today. Fermentation will take about 3 to 4 days. Afterwards, that mash will be sent over to begin the distillation process. Distillation begins with a column still. A second distillation process will take place in our doublers. At this point in the process, the product we're making is known as distillate. It is also known as new make, high wine, most popularly known, however, as white dog. It is 135 proof. For producing bourbon or rye whiskey, that distillate is sent down further along the property to the cistern room, where we proof it down, put it into the barrel, and then send that barrel off to start aging in a warehouse. For vodka, the distillate will go through one more column still before being proofed down and bottled. For gin, it is the same process, but with one extra step before proofing and bottling, the gin baskets. This is where botanicals are added to infuse the distillate with all those lovely flavors and aromas. Welcome to Warehouse B. This is the only warehouse left that was built during Colonel Taylor's era, the early 1900s. Warehouse B is about 534 feet long, looks like it never ends down there, and it is the longest standing aging warehouse of its design in the world. It does hold about 35 to 36,000 barrels. This is where we've been aging our bourbon and rye whiskey since 2016. Now, Warehouse B needed extensive repair. The entire roof had to be replaced, along with about 75% of this internal wood ricking. When our founders got a quote from one of the most notable warehouse repair companies in the nation, it was pretty bad. The quote was, "Tear it down and build a new one." For Will and Wes, just really wasn't an option. We really wanted to keep this warehouse. It did take about 2 years to have it fully restored, to get everything stabilized, get a new roof, get new ricking, but we got it done. And again, we've been aging our bourbon and rye whiskey for just over 4 years now.
Hello, my name is Jordan, and today I'm going to talk about some of the spirits in our beverage portfolio at Castle & Key. We're going to start off today with our rye whiskey. This is something that we just recently released in December of 2020, and we released 2 different batches of it. However, they both share the same mash bill. They're both going to be 63% rye, they're going to have 17% yellow corn, and 20% malted barley. What that does for the spirit is the malted barley is going to give it a really round, unctuous mouthfeel, give it some depth of flavor, some of those chocolate notes, and give it a really nice mouthfeel. That yellow corn is going to add some sweetness to it. It's going to take away from some of the rye spice, make it more appealing towards a bourbon drinker. And then that 63% rye is going to be there to let you know it's a rye whiskey. It's going to keep it fun and entertaining, but it is definitely not going to be too intense on the palate. That's why we like to think of our rye as a bourbon drinker's rye. They're definitely really approachable regardless of what type of whiskey that you drink. There are some differences in between batch 1 and batch 2. Batch 1 is going to be a little bit of a more classic rye. It's going to have some of those apple streusel, rye spice, baked cinnamon, nutmeg, clove as well. Batch 2 is going to have a little more mint to it. It's got some agave nectar in there. It's got a little bit of honeysuckle, maybe a touch more floral. But they're both awesome products to begin with. So the next product I'm going to talk about is going to be our Roots of Ruin gin. This is our flagship gin in the marketplace, and it's easily interchangeable with a lot of those top quality gins out there, such as Hendrick's, Bombay Sapphire, Tanqueray, The Botanist, and others of the like. What we've done that's a little different is we've taken a little softer juniper approach to it, and we've used some rosemary to enhance that flavor. Those flavors work really well together. It also makes it really approachable towards consumers who may have had a bad experience with gin in the past. We've also used some really great botanicals like chamomile, lemon verbena, as well as some ginger in there too, to really make it nice, light, and refreshing. This gin is great in all applications that you could use. Making a classic gin and tonic is great. Any type of sour or a gimlet is going to be fantastic. My personal favorite for our Roots of Ruin gin is going to be a classic Negroni though. In addition to our Roots of Ruin gin, we also make several iterations of seasonal gins here at Castle & Key. These are really going to focus on the tonalities of flavors that you'd find during the spring and the fall seasons of the year. For example, we've had a spring gin come out that had a lot of soft citrus in it, whereas we've had some fall gin come out that's had some really autumnal flavors such as clove, Chinese cinnamon, and other baking spice flavor profiles that you'd encounter in the fall part of the season. These come in at varying proofs, and every year they're going to change, so they are limited time offerings in the marketplace. We also make a vodka here at Castle & Key. Our vodka is going to be distilled from our bourbon mash bill. It's 73% corn, 17% malted barley, and 10% rye. What that's going to do is provide an incredibly well-structured base for our vodka. We distill it just like our bourbon, once to get our low wine, a second to get our high wine, but instead of proofing that down and putting it into a barrel, we're actually going to distill that a third time in our vodka still. That is going to provide an incredible product, and what it's lacking is it's not going to have any of that harsh ethyl alcohol bite that you find in a lot of vodkas in the marketplace. What we like to say here is it's vodka that wanted to be bourbon, but we didn't let that happen. We just simply had an awesome bourbon base, and then we distilled out more flavor to get in that grain neutral spirit territory, and then we proof that down to bottling, and then it goes into the marketplace. This vodka is great in any cocktail that you might want to use, from a cosmopolitan to a white Russian. It's got a great kind of buttered toast, creamy macadamia nut mouthfeel to it, and it's all around just a really fantastic product. We make bourbon here at Castle & Key Distillery. Our bourbon, however, is not quite ready yet. It's still all in the barrels. We started distilling in December of 2016, so we've got many barrels put away, but they're not quite ready yet. However, we do have two different mash bills that we use for our bourbon. The first of which is going to be a traditional bourbon that utilizes rye whiskey as its secondary grain. That mash bill is going to be 73% corn, it's going to be 10% rye, and 17% malted barley. In addition to that, we make a wheated bourbon here. That is 73% corn, 10% wheat, and 17% malted barley. Now, they're all still aging. Some of the oldest stocks are over 4 years old, and we're excited to see them come to a marketplace soon.
For this last section, we are going to run through a few cocktail suggestions for our main spirits. For the rye, we are going to do an old fashioned. For the vodka, we're going to be doing a Moscow Mule. And for the gin, we'll be doing a classic gin and tonic. So for the old fashioned, we're going to start off with roughly half an ounce of simple syrup. To that, we are going to add 3 dashes of bitters. We are using Angostura bitters today, which is pretty standard stuff. And then we're going to do 1 3/4 ounce of rye whiskey. We'll then add ice to the glass, give that a good stir. And then we're going to peel an orange. We will express the peel over the glass and then rub it along the edge and then drop it in for the garnish. Now moving on to our second cocktail today, which will be a gin and tonic. So to start off, we'll do half an ounce of our Jack Rudy tonic syrup, and then we'll add 1 3/4 ounce of our gin. We'll throw some ice into the glass and then top it with some club soda. Give it a nice good stir, and then we will peel a lemon, give that a nice twist, and drop that into the glass for our garnish. All right, and for our last cocktail today, we are going to be doing a Moscow Mule. So we'll start off with half an ounce of lime juice, then we'll add in 1 3/4 ounce of our Sacred Spring vodka. We'll throw some ice into the glass, and then we will top it with some ginger beer, give that a good stir, and garnish with a lime slice. This concludes our training video for today. Thank you so much for watching and for being a part of the Castle & Key story. Happy selling!